There are some very interesting experiences that I've been having my entire life that are a result of my practice of athanatophobology. So, thanatophobia is simply the fear of death, and it's very common. And I only recently named it yesterday, just because I was thinking about Greek and just how I believe, I never really looked into it, that the character Thanos from the Marvel comics was probably and somewhat inspired by the name Thanatos, which is the Greek god of death, and he's related to Morpheus, the god of dreams, and Hypnos, the god of sleep. And there's also, Nict, night, and all these other related entities. But I was just thinking about the name, because some time ago I wrote something about the illusion of death on my website, Hypnoathletics, and just some things that I've been really looking into. But I've also realized that most of my life I've actually been studying and working on the practice of athanatophobia, basically not being afraid of death, because I find it to be very inhibiting, and there are various characteristics of the fear of death that are somewhat useful, but they don't have to be accompanied by fear once you understand what these are, and because they're part of our nervous system, specifically the sympathetic nervous system. And so you can learn to redirect the types of thoughts and messages. And this is what athanatophobology has come to. I mean, obviously I'm kind of geeking out on it and being a nerd with the language. People always talk all the time about when you are sharing something to not use big words and make it for every man and all this other stuff like that. Unfortunately, I don't operate like that because I'm just excited about these things. And again and again, you'll hear, especially when people talk about branding and marketing, and they say things about how, it's not about you, and you want to make it accessible to people, and on and on and on. And I get that. It's just that maybe I have a problem because I don't operate like that, and I'm not willing to change how I speak and the words that I use. And I really don't think that there's any real reason to. I mean, you're always going to find your audience, so to speak, regardless of how you operate. And over time, things have just simply gotten better in that realm. And when I speak of marketing, I'm talking simply about all of the things to be able to get reach to people. If I put up a sign somewhere, you could call that advertising. If that sign is on my shirt while I'm doing some tricks and flips in capoeira, or on my car, you can say that's promotion. If I'm doing tricks and stuff like that at the farmers market, and I do a demonstration for the police department, and the newspaper picks it up and thinks it's cool and writes a story about it, that's publicity. If the chief of police thinks that it's really cool and he applauds it and wants to set up another show and talks about that as well, then and wants to set up something with me because he thinks I'm great, that's public relations. And and if I can work out a deal with the city and answer questions about how it's going to benefit the police and get them more fit and have them be able to have more body awareness and stuff like that, then that's sales. And all of that stuff falls under the category of marketing. But And of course, almost anyone nowadays, if you're entrepreneurial, if you're business minded, then you want to have all of those things happen. You want basically as much attention as you possibly can, and to transact as many, or you want to generate as many transactions as possible to make a profit, so that you can continue basically doing what you're passionate about. And it's no easy feat, for sure, but simply because of my persistence, it's somewhat seeming to pan out a little bit more that way. But for right now, I mean, I basically just fund everything out of my own income, all of my marketing, all of my promotion, all of the stuff that I do. But so now back to the idea of, you know, why I went off on that short tangent about the word athanatophobia. I'm going to roll up my windows here. Oh, I really need to get something to eat, because I worked out. I was at the park for about an hour earlier today, and the temperature was in the 90s, and I was sweating, and I was drinking a lot of water, but I also didn't eat anything today yet. And so I'm surprised. I'm wearing like about 20 pounds of stainless steel chains, and I was doing backflips and kicks and crazy stuff, and so now I'm starting to feel it. And so and I addressed that, and probably I should take a tip from, you know, Jason Lamar, and just quit qualifying things and just assert and go and just say what I'm saying, because I don't even remember if I was this self-conscious about this stuff before. So I mean, I might as well just screw it and just move forward and just be as brazen as usual, especially because of how controversial this subject is. I mean, even when I present my transcripts and things like that to AI, they push against certain things that I'm saying about death and self-preservation. It just doesn't get it, and most people don't get it at all. It's because of the fact that people are too afraid. Like, it all goes back to thanatophobia. Just people are too fucking afraid to die, and too afraid of discomfort and pain, and like afraid of it, right? Not willing to deal with it at all. I'm not saying that we shouldn't practice self-preservation and that we shouldn't want to continue living, and because I want to. I love living and exploring life and having adventures and learning things and doing stuff. But that's completely different from walking around the earth as I do, you know, and as many other people do, right? But then on top of that, as most people do and I don't, the difference is people go around with this underlying fundamental fear of dying, and it inhibits and gets in the way and causes a lot of friction for a lot of things that people want to do, and they're not even aware that most of everything, from just completing tasks and doing everything, procrastination, not getting things started, almost all of it has an underlying link to a fear of death, because, you know, people don't do things because they think that someone's going to make fun of them. So the fear of rejection follows the same neural pathways as pain. And the reason why is because a lot of times rejection and being ostracized and excommunicated and all these other things, you know, very tribal and ancient, is related to not being part of the community and the group, and can lead to, you know, being alone, being, you know, stalked by animals and not having the protection of your tribe to protect you, or you not being able to hunt well and not being part of the community to be able to get food for your own, or just the being alone and, you know, not having the shelter, not having the comfort, not having the group, not having the community. And all of these things are linked essentially to ideas like, if I'm not liked, I'm not going to have a romantic partner, I'm not going to reproduce, I'm not going to pass my genes on, you know, I'm going to be alone. And that sadness, that loneliness is also related to like how things, because for some reason, and, you know, career and relationships kind of follow a lot of the same pathways. And I was listening to something from this psychologist, I forget what his name is right now. His first name is Orion, Dr. Orion something, Thaliban or something like that. It's a cool name. I might have gotten his last name wrong, but he mentioned something in one of his videos that job interviews and dating are very similar in a lot of ways. And I came to this conclusion myself about a year or so ago. I articulated, although I've known it for a long time, it's just that a lot of things with me tend to take a while to bubble to the surface before I start to articulate them. It's sort of my own checks and balances before I am personally, I'm not sure if the word is confident enough or comfortable enough, or just feel like I am able to more clearly articulate it than not. But either way, all of these things being related, and it's fascinating because of how connected all of those things are to ultimately people connecting it to dying and death, which is pain, and people assume that dying is going to be painful, and in some ways it might be. Some people, like a lot of people, die painfully, and I get not wanting that. Like, I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't like being uncomfortable. I'm actually kind of uncomfortable right now with the fact that I'm hungry, and also with the fact that I jumped off of an aluminum picnic bench in the middle of the park when I was training, and I landed on the floor and did a combat roll. And because of these chains that I'm wearing around my waist, one of them dug into the right back of my bone, and the back of my pelvic bone area, and I'm sure I'm bruised, and I'm sitting in my car with this against my back and sort of pressing against it. It doesn't feel comfortable. However, I've just learned to manage discomfort and manage pain in general overall. And I don't want it, but it's part of life. And that's just the way it is sometimes. And I think that from my experience, what I've learned is that that's the way it is. Sometimes you get hungry, sometimes you get tired, sometimes you get hurt. It's a part of life, especially when you are engaged in a multitude of activities and you just live a full life. I'm playing music, and I'm practicing martial arts and doing acrobatic things, and walking around a lot, and then driving and reading and writing and speaking. And so just having a fully engaged life, things happen, and that's just the way it is. And then I do put myself through some pain intentionally. I do these things that I call concrete slam knuckle push-ups, or concrete knuckle slam push-ups, something like that. I called it yesterday, at the same time when I first recorded about athanatophobology, the study of not fearing death. And so I don't even know. I'm not saying that I'm not a masochist, although I'm not sure if what that would be defined as technically. But there's something interesting about feeling pain that is somewhat satisfying to me. I wouldn't say pleasurable, but satisfying. Especially when I've done something that's painful and then it's finished. I mean, even the routine that I do when I'm filling up my car with gas, and I do these jump switch lunges. I do 20 of them, alternating from left to right, and then I go down and I do these concrete knuckle slam push-ups. I do 20 of those, and then I jump back up and I start doing the jump switch lunges again. And by the time I'm getting to the end of that second set, before I do the second set of 20 knuckle slam push-ups, my legs are burning, because I'm jumping as high as I can from the ground, doing kind of like floating between the jumps, and it takes a lot of energy to do that. And so, but I know that eventually it's going to be done, and so there's something pleasurable about that. Even, training today for, an hour, and just how excruciating it is to do these movements and jump and flip and kick wearing 20 pounds of chains, and in the hot, 90 something degree sun, and feeling dehydrated, and also noticing you know what, I don't have as much energy because I didn't eat yet today. It's already 6:50 in the evening. And I did that from between like around 4:30 to 5:30, something like that. And, you know, and I'm not trying to torture myself. And also, I didn't even mean to not eat. It's just that I got caught up doing other things and I wasn't really thinking about it. But going back again, let's circle back to the, you know, the understanding about pain and death. What is going on here? While I'm stopped, sometimes it's probably good for me to look at. I got text messages. Are any of them important? That I don't want to see. That I don't need. Okay. So not a big deal. But underlying all of these issues really comes down to this anticipation and this anxiety over feeling pain. And what I'm talking about in a lot of ways has to do with eliminating that anticipation. It's because, you know, that saying that says, you know, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, or I forget how it goes. I need food. But that's kind of true, because what people are just anticipating that what may or may not happen, or how they may or may not feel. And so, you know, I've noticed that one of the practices that I've had a long time, because it manifests itself in so many different things, because I've intentionally redirected external stressful stimuli towards this particular type of response. And the particular type of response I'm talking about has to do with, I basically have decided to Hulk out. You know, instead of all of the possible reactions that a person can have to various stressors, right? To pain, to being startled, to loud noises, to, you know, any kind of emergencies, you know, thunder, to car crashing next to you, somebody walking up behind you and grabbing you, or yelling, or something, just all kinds of sudden things that could happen, you know, up to and including pain or being attacked, all that stuff. My whole point, one of the things that I've been practicing, a huge part of this study of not fearing death, has to actually do with redirecting or reprogramming your reaction into a very specific type of response. And mine is, what I've deliberately done is that every time something shocking, stressful, or potentially traumatic happens, I've just decided to focus on making sure that I respond in a way that I become somewhat enraged, potentially enraged, but in what I experienced as a cold, dark, silent, calm, like an ice wall, almost like a sphere of ice that within it contains this explosive volcanic fury that also has within it this preparedness that's based on self-defense and martial arts, that is prepared to unleash any kind of attack that's possible. So what I'm saying is that for any potential, so if the way to think about it for yourself is that for any potential stimuli or stressor that would at some point in time be interpreted as fear, where most people panic or get hysterical, they scream, they cry, they beg, they plead, they run or freeze, right? The whole sympathetic nervous system, a lot of people have a flight or freeze response out of fear. Whereas what I'm specifically saying is that I practice specifically on enhancing my fight response. That's it. It's excluding and cutting off the flight and freeze responses in favor of fight, of engage, of combat. Now, this is not to be taken as that there is no time to retreat and that sometimes you do not flee as a tactic, right? Like you need to duck and cover sometimes in a hail of bullets, because if you get hit by the bullets, then you can't counterattack and destroy your enemy, right? So I'm not talking about that there's no appropriate time to retreat or duck and cover, right? To shield yourself. That's tactical. That's strategic. That is self-preservation. That's intelligent operation, right? So, sometimes people take those things somewhat too literally and think, well, sometimes it's good to run. Don't be stupid. That's not what I'm talking about, right? Because what is interesting to note is that within a combat response, a fight response, a confrontation response, fury, rage, the potential for that unleashing an attack or counterattack, right? There's nowhere in that, and nowhere in war ever, that says that you don't sometimes need to take cover. I mean, that's already embedded within the idea of fighting. You don't go into a boxing ring or kickboxing or MMA and just stand there and take punches to the face or knees to the gut, right? That's just dumb, right? You have defenses and escapes. You move out of the way so you can counterattack. So combat in itself already has something that's related to fleeing, but it's fleeing for a purpose. It's not fleeing just because you're a chicken shit and you have zero preparedness, no preparation, no training whatsoever. It's completely different. Because what most people have is a panic, hysterical response that basically they're just flooded with an overload of chaos, their life flashing before their eyes, as I call it, right? What that is that you just have all of these things flooding your system. All the potential pain you might feel, the things you might leave behind, the things you might miss out, like all this crying, panic, whiny, like all that stuff. That's what is usually happening. This entire flood of panic and all these images and everything in your life that you potentially have lost and that you're not gonna, like, that's what happens. People just go into shock. It's a form of shock where they just get overwhelmed by all of these different things, and the reason is because they have not learned how to train and direct the threat response into a fight pattern, into a fight response. It's all reaction. But when you train and you specifically learn to direct any incoming stressors to a potential attack or counterattack, right, and change your emotional state from one of panic, hysteria, and fear and cowering and these other type of emotions to anger and rage, which I find to be personally better, then you've consciously taken something as an unconscious reaction and turned it into a subconscious response to be part of your second nature instead, because you've trained it with conscious awareness and then turned it into your new second nature, where before you didn't have that kind of programmed response, and you can do that programming yourself. It's just that most people don't have any idea that that's possible, and therefore don't do anything about it. If you don't think it's possible and don't have the understanding, then why would you? And that's part of what I'm here for, to make you aware that you can. It's possible. So the understanding first, you have to be aware that it's a possibility, that you're actually able to do that. And if you're not aware that that's a possibility, then of course, why would you even consider that you have that type of programmatic control over what a lot of people just assume to be these automatic responses that only have instinctual responses that can't be rerouted And that's really one of the things I'm talking about, is rerouting. So, an example that I've been using lately is the Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, who in 1981 in March jumped in front of a bullet to shield President Ronald Reagan. And I don't know what is inside of his mind, but here's something that I do know about that kind of training. So it's very rigorous and consistent, intense training to be able to feel the fear and do something anyway, right? So that this is very key, because it's very likely, although I don't know, but I'm framing it this way for understanding of what I'm talking about here. So it's very likely that Secret Service agent McCarthy, felt fear, but still, because of his training, he jumped in front of the bullets anyway, right? So basically he redirected his physiological response, what his body does when feeling fear in that kind of situation, by just training over and over again. What I'm saying is that not only can you physiologically train your actual motor, muscular movement responses, right, that when you're feeling fear, but that you can actually also change that, instead of it's not being fear, to something more like excitement, right? And the kind of excitement I'm talking about, because, and this is the personal way that I use it, you could do something else. You could be crazy as hell and like get into a giddy, goofy, manic type of episode if you really wanted to, and like make a whole game out of it, and you could be laughing all the way while your body is still in this sympathetic state where your adrenaline's pumping, your responses are heightened, things kind of seem like they're in slow motion. You can still have all the same type of physiological and biological and instinctual patterns that usually accompany a feeling of fear and panic and all those other things that people usually feel, but instead you can change both states. You can change not only how you physically feel and what you physically do, but you can also change how you internally, emotionally feel. And so, and the only reason I'm saying this so definitively is because I've done it, and I do it all the time. It's part of my existence. It's such a normal, usual, everyday part of my experience that I almost take it for granted sometimes, and I would completely be unaware of it if it wasn't for the fact that I have diligently, myself, rigorously, intensely, consistently studied this for myself, and just had the crazy idea that I don't have to have panicked and feared and completely undirected, chaotic feelings in order to have the same type of heightened physical responses that are required for survival, or at the very least prevailing in sports combat, right? So you don't have to be scared. And a lot of times, a lot of this has been triggered lately by, a lot of times when I'm working and writing and I'll have some kind of movie or something in the background. Most recently it was Alien Romulus, and there was a scene where there was a girl and she says, "Oh, please don't let me die." And before that there was somebody else begging, "You're not going to kill me, are you?" Or someone, "Please don't kill me." And it's just over and over and over again, people begging for their lives. And it's so alien to me, and it seems pathetic and just like ridiculous. And I'm not making fun of people, I'm just saying, because of my perspective, right? Because and I said this earlier, that because I'm so used to my response to it, and because I'm so arrogant in the way that I feel like the way that I respond to it is superior, right? That I take it for granted that other people don't have that kind of training. So it's so alien to me. It's kind of like I just look at it like I'm some kind of alien being, like pathetic humans. Like, why do you have to operate like that? Like the whole puny god, it's like, it's just, I'm just thinking, I don't. And so it comes down to this whole thing of otherness, right? That one of the underlying reasons why people are prejudiced and racist and very tribal as human beings are, that when we don't experience the world like other people do, we arrogantly and mistakenly and just very strangely look at people as others, right? It's like how, you know, we can label people as enemy combatants and make them kind of non-human and go to war and just and destroy cities and kill people because we're in combat. It's something that we somewhat have to do in order to compartmentalize. Like, I've heard stories of, and it's also part of the research that I've done, I'm not sure that it's true, and it could just be a rumor, but I've heard that people in, like, for example, the Israeli military and like the Mossad or whatever, the special forces, that they don't experience PTSD at anywhere near the same rate as, for example, American soldiers do, because they've learned how to completely compartmentalize their job from who they are. So they don't have like PTSD because they've had to kill people or see people get killed and things exploding around them and all that intensity that they've learned to somehow train out of them. And it was a very interesting thing to hear. And again, there are a lot of things that I hear about that may or may not be true, but when I apply them anyway, I find out that you can actually get to that state, even if it might just be a rumor. So somehow, somewhere, it must be based in reality somehow. And there are a lot of things like this of determining what your end goal is to be, and basically finding a positive or productive use for what could sometimes be called confirmation bias. And so, you know, watching videos a lot, I think it was on Facebook, where there was a guy critiquing, you know, judo or whatever, and he does these various different videos about judo, and he brought up this interesting experiment where these young kids were told about the objectives of judo, which I think are, you know, you got to take down the person and throw them on their back, or hold them down for 3 seconds as a pin, and that's how you win in judo. But they told them the objectives, but they didn't teach them any judo moves. And what happened is that over time, these children started to develop like advanced judo techniques. They started figuring out how to best do the takedowns and get the result that they were told is the goal. So it was reverse engineering. They were only told what they had to, how to win, but not the techniques with which to win. And they reverse engineered it from that. In the same way, I've done something very similar with capoeira, where I entered capoeira thinking that it's a purely like for the purposes of fighting with it. So I got into street fights and in the ring with capoeira and had to discard a bunch of things and add certain things and learn certain things, and using the philosophy of Miyamoto Musashi and Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, taking what works and discarding the rest. But because I had this end goal that I wanted to fight with it, and I wanted to win fights with it, and what's the best way possible. And then, of course, while I was doing all this, MMA was becoming popular in the United States, and so I started seeing all of those things. And so I got to a point where how I use capoeira is mostly for fighting. Like my playing capoeira is okay, and, you know, using capoeira as a dance is also pretty decent, just because I use it to dance almost with everything. But those are the three components: dance, fight, game. But I focused on the fight part mostly. So there's elements of, you know, because capoeira has takedowns, so there's elements of freestyle wrestling, some judo things, some Muay Thai, there's American kickboxing, there's Western boxing, and, you know, but it looks like on the surface, when you first look at it, there's capoeira, but I don't do what most capoeiristas do. And so, and it's the same thing about fear, right? So I determined, how do I want to respond to things that normally would scare people or would have scared me, and that did scare me when I was very young. And I decided that I want to respond like some kind of like supervillain, right? Just fucking rage out, or really more like Hulk. And it's something that my mom even, attributed to me. She says you would Hulk out. When things would happen, like people. I remember once she even got kind of upset with me because there was a house in the Bronx that we were moving out of, and my dad was selling it to one of the neighbors who wanted to take over the house. And so they were in there doing stuff, and the neighbor's kid was in the house, and I was sitting on a couch, and I remember the kid came up behind me and did something, tapped me on the shoulder, and I reached around like I was gonna hit him, and when I saw it was him, I kind of just I avoided swinging into him. But my mom was like, look what you almost did, because my response to being startled is to attack. And I've been doing that for a very, very long time. I mean, I left from the Bronx, and I'm wondering, was it the Bronx or Queens? Either way, I left from Queens when I was 6 and the Bronx when I was about 13, and before I went to Florida. So either way, I've been doing that that's been a programmed response of mine for a very long time, is that I just don't put up with any kind of crap. Now I've matured to the point where, like I said, there's a calm, cold, dark silence where I have the rage encapsulated as a potential explosion of an attack. So there's a few milliseconds of a buffer for me to assess whether or not it's an actual threat. But the response is always there. You see what I mean? Like I'm not leaving anything to chance to be anything other than. So I'm not leaving it to chance to be like I'm going to scream or panic or run away or cry or any of this other stuff. Like, I'm just not leaving it to chance. Like, I train so that my response is to destroy the source of the stimulus. That's it. In any way, shape, or form. Win, lose, or draw, but that's the thing. Attack. Which reminds me, also, you can tell I'm a comic book and fantasy nerd geek on that end of things, but it reminds me of when Captain America in the first Avengers asked Tony Stark, he's like, what's your plan, or something like that, of attack? And he said, what's your plan? He's like, I have a plan. He's like, what's that? Attack, something like that. It was actually, I just really like when he said it. He says, it's like, we need a plan. He's like, I have a plan. It's like, what's that? Attack. And that's what it has always been for me, is just attack. And I picked that up from somewhere, and I think that it's quite useful, but also that's why it's necessary to have a buffer, because sometimes people will sneak up on you thinking that it's funny or whatever, and you don't want to hurt people that are just trying to play a joke. Like there was a guy, I was doing security at this place, the Green Parrot in Chicks Beach here in Virginia Beach, and a guy I'd met a couple of times, and he walked up behind me and he just really quickly like jammed his finger, I don't know what he did, he grabbed my ribs and said something like, give me all your money. And just later on through, when I went inside, he was sitting inside. He said, hey man, I just wanted to say I apologize. I didn't mean to blah, 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 blah. And then there was another lady sitting there, Dea, and he said to her, he's like, yeah, he didn't even respond. He didn't even respond. Like, he's like, they didn't even react at all. I was like, yeah, because I didn't perceive a threat. And very quickly, I kind of noticed that deflated him. So I'm somewhat tactful. So I said, not that you don't pose a threat, just that I realized that you didn't have any ill intentions. And Dea caught it really quickly too, because she turned to me, she says, I like how you worded that very well. So I'm not a monster completely, but I can be, and I like it, and I want to be. And so a final note that needs to be said about this is, because this is not claiming badassery in the sense of that I can beat everybody. That's not what it's about. It's just that I refuse to submit to anyone. So, and that's a clear distinction of where part of my athanatophobology, my study of not fearing death, one of the components is that there is nothing, no one, not even any potential God or creator of the universe or any all-powerful beings. I don't care if they're angels, demons, aliens. I don't care. The whole thing is that I'm going to defend myself, whether I live or die or get captured, enslaved, or anything like that. It's an internal understanding that I will never, ever submit. So you may as well kill me. And the thing is that whenever there are any, retreats or feints, it's to live to fight another day so that I can come back and destroy the enemy. I know, and it's a very extreme and radical thought process, but I find it to be necessary to be in more absolute control and sovereign control of my being, of my awareness, of my thought processes. One of the things I found by determining to transmute fear in this way is that I think more clearly. I'm much more efficient. I'm not burdened or bogged down by all of that potential chaos because I've decided exactly where any kind of external stimuli like that is going to go. I'm not leaving anything to chance. I've decided ahead of time, this is how I want my responses to be, and that's what they're going to be. And then, like I said, over time, I matured to the point where, well, it's not just unbridled completely. There's a thin buffer of that cold, dark, silent calm that takes that, those fractions of a second, that attosecond, that femtosecond, whatever, that very small period of time in order to assess. And it might even be, like a spider sense, like assessing, forward in the future, like some spiders seem to have. And I really like spiders and snakes. And a lot of spiders and snakes have and cats have some really amazing response times to certain things. So, and all of that is part of my research. All of that stuff is taken into consideration. This is all part of it. And it's quite possible for anyone to do it. If I can do it, anybody can. And it's a fascinating way to live, because it actually makes life a more exciting adventure. You actually operate more efficiently when there's less friction between how you think, when you determine what your responses are going to be to everything. And I just live more fully this way, because I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of losing a job, of crashing my car, of being homeless, of where I'm going to sleep, or who's around me, or anything like that, because I've decided that I'm going to have absolute sovereign dignity over my emotional, spiritual, physical being. That's it, period. And it doesn't mean that I can't be beaten or I can't be defeated. It's just that I've decided that internally I'm not going to be. And I think that it was attributed to Nelson Mandela when they said, how did he, stay so upright and maybe even optimistic? He says that even though my body was imprisoned, my mind was free. So I'm not sure if that's him that said that, but I know that is actually a feature or a characteristic or a mindset that I've heard about other people who've been either political or other unjust prisoners, So it's not like I'm doing anything new. And even when I brought up, when I entered my last transcript, when I spoke about something similar to this to DeepSeek R1, it says that even though I'm putting a novel kind of street level type of attitude or perspective on what I'm saying about the fear of death, DeepSeek said, it's not really that novel. There's ancient Stoicism and other various different perspectives that it presented to me that were related. So, and again, this is just a case of me coming to conclusions that other people have independently, and it happens all the time. But it happens only when you are fully engaged in life. And my 3 M's helped me to be fully engaged in life. My research in study and practice and application of metaphysics, which is philosophy, spirituality, and science. Music, which involves writing lyrics, singing, composing music, playing, recording, performing musical instruments, and martial arts. The physical aspect and this aspect of athanatophobology, just not fearing death and the study of it. And when you just live a full life in that way, where you're well-rounded intellectually, academically, as well as physically, athletically, and artistically, then you tend to uncover and to discover things in life that maybe other people have come to the same conclusions, but you can find them independently. You just have to be engaged in life. You have to be aware, have self-awareness, and just be disciplined and determined enough to want to be more. Not in a, like these crazy hustle culture ways or whatever people say about that stuff. I'm just enthusiastic about life. And even as enthusiastic about life that I am, I'm not afraid to lose it. And that's the bottom line there, is you live life more fully when you're not afraid to lose it, because you're gonna die anyway at some point in time. So what's the point in fearing that? What's the point in fearing the unknown? Instead, state arrogantly that you know the outcome, that you know how to respond regardless of what awaits you in the afterlife, if there is even such a thing, and just decide that, hey, I bow to nothing. I bow to no one. I won't bow to anything. I'm not going to submit to anything. Period. Not out of fear, not out of any kind of panic, no stress, no hysteria. I've decided that I'm going to eternally be sovereign, regardless of what the circumstances are. I am Hakeem Ali-Bocas Alexander.